Okay, so today we're going to talk about using congruent triangles. Okay, and this corresponding parts of congruent triangles is going to become a really big deal. And before we start talking about it, I want you to look, so corresponding parts. Okay, so that means the parts that are in the same place in each triangle, and I'll explain that in a second, of congruent triangles. So if we have to know the triangles are congruent, then those parts are congruent. Okay, we think of this as we use it as a shortcut as Cpctc. It's kind of annoying, but what you need to know is that every other letter is C. Okay, that will just help you remember it. Okay, so now let's look at this. So if I look at these two triangles, I can say, you know what, I know that they're congruent, and so pause to take a minute to write a congruent statement and then what shortcut you know. Just good review. Okay, so I'm going to say triangle ABC is congruent. ABC is congruent to SGF. Okay, remember that letter is important. So if you used a different starting triangle than ABC, make sure your letters match up. A and S match up, B and G, C and F. Okay, and the reason they're congruent, right, is side angle side, which is a shortcut that we know and it's valid. Great. So if we know that, what else do we know? These two triangles are congruent, which means they're the same size and shape, despite my poor drawing. Okay. So because of this, what I do know is that angle B is congruent to angle G because they're corresponding. They're the ones that they match up, right? So see if you can write out there's two other corresponding parts that are congruent that we know now. So pause and figure that out. Okay, so what we do know is angle C is congruent to angle F, and then we also know that side BC is congruent to side GF, right? So these three things are things that we know once we know the triangles are congruent. Okay, we're going to use this in a proof. Okay, so take a minute, pause if you need to look at this setup of a proof. Okay, so here we've got these things. As I walk through this proof, at this point, it would be awesome if you wanted to try and do it on your own. And if you can, that's great. But the expectation is not that you could go ahead and do this proof perfectly by yourself right now. The expectation is that you could understand what is happening as it's being done. Okay, so I'm going to start with simply the givens. Okay, and as I write these givens, what I'm thinking about is like, oh, parallel lines. What do I know about parallel lines? As I look here, these lines are parallel. At this picture, this to me looks like a transversal that might be helpful. So what I'm going to say here is, given this, I know that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3 and angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. Right? So these angles are congruent. And I'm going to mark them in a different color so I know that that's something that I proved. And the reason is that if lines are parallel, then alternate interior angles are congruent. Right? Okay. I also know as I look at this, that WY is congruent to WY, right? And that is the reflexive property. Okay. So why would I say that? Right? Why would I say that? And the reason is when I look at this now, I see, oh, look at this. I got two triangles. And now I know they're congruent. Okay, so I can now say triangle XYW is congruent to, take a second, make sure you can do the right order. XYW is congruent to triangle ZWY. And the reason is angle side angle. Okay, so now that I know that these two triangles are congruent, now I can say, hey, even though I don't know yet right now that these lines are congruent, they have to be because they're the corresponding parts, they're the parts that match up, X, W, and Y, Z, of triangles that I know are congruent. So I can say XW is congruent to YZ. corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so real quick before we end this video, I just want to go over a couple things that I know are true. So the stuff I'm going to write in black right now are my thoughts, not necessarily what I would write on proof. So when I use this angle side angle, right? Actually, let's start here. When I use this reason, okay, what I think, okay, so this is what I'm thinking. What I need to make sure are, do I know lines are parallel? Sorry for that terrible handwriting. And I can say, yep, I do right here. Got lines parallel. Here, I think, do I have angles, side, angle, congruent in the right order? Do I have that? And I look up and I'm like, oh, I do, right? Angle, side, angle. And then last, I have to think a couple things here in order for this to be true. One, are triangles congruent? That's the first question, yes. And then are the things in the statement column, are they actually corresponding parts? Are they corresponding parts? Okay, so I really want you to think about the hypothesis part of our conditional statements, right? The hypothesis part of these reasons are being fulfilled earlier on in the proof. Okay, and I hope that makes sense. So as a quick recap, what this video you should get out of is that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And please use Cpctc. You do not need to write out all the words. But the hypothesis part, right? So the part that you need to have fulfilled in a proof is that you have congruent triangles and then that means that corresponding parts are congruent. So this is the conclusion part, right? Sorry about this. Corresponding parts are congruent, right? So this, right, has to happen earlier in the proof. Earlier in the proof, right? And then this corresponding parts part, that has to be the statement when Cpctc is used in a proof.